I am here to say my prayers are with you folks between Bradenton and Sarasota, maybe from Tampa Bay all the way down to Naples. I know that Milton is bearing down on you. Going to hit overnight. It's a Category 5 right now. It may lessen a little bit, but that's not going to make a bit of difference to you. And so to my audience in Sarasota and Tampa Bay listening on The Answer 93.7, 9:30 a.m. for Sarasota, and it's 8:60 a.m. for Tampa Bay. And all the way over on the other side of Florida in Orlando on 950 The Answer, 94.9 FM. I'm thinking about you. This audience will step up to help you after the storm hits. If you're in the car, just be patient with the people in front of you. They're worried too. I want to begin this morning by saying if you had any doubt in your mind about voting for Donald Trump, Kamala Harris ought to have removed it yesterday in one exchange on The View, of all places, with Sonny Hostin. Sonny Hostin asked Kamala Harris, I want to get this exactly right, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years? Again, that's the question. If anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years? And the vice president responded. This is Kamala Harris. There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact. Not a thing comes to mind. Now, I have said a few times, sometimes I think she hadn't got a thought in her head. Well, she stated yesterday she doesn't have a thought in her head. Not a thing. May I count some ways for you? Well, Afghanistan might have been handled better. Maybe Joe Biden shouldn't have announced we were leaving by September 11th. Of course, he changed that and then said we were leaving by August 31st. Perhaps we ought not to have evacuated Bagram, or at least not to have evacuated Bagram without telling them we were leaving. Maybe we ought not to have left U.S. citizens in Afghanistan. Maybe we have not to have left our green card holders, all the SIV eligible people that we left behind to be murdered by the Taliban. Maybe we shouldn't have had all those Marines unprotected at Abbey Gate. Maybe we should have sent more troops. That's just Afghanistan. Maybe we shouldn't have left billions of dollars of military equipment for the Taliban to resell. Maybe not. How about Ukraine? Maybe Joe Biden ought not to have said, Kamala Harris could have said, I don't think I would have said a minor incursion wouldn't bother me. I might have speeded up weapons. I might have not restrained the use of those weapons. I might have supported Ukraine at the beginning when the Russians were coming in instead of telling Zelensky to scamper. And when Zelensky said, I want a ride, I want ammunition, not a ride, I would have given him more ammunition. Perhaps I would have been on better terms with Israel with regards to intelligence. Maybe I would have supported them better after 10/7. Joe Biden made a great initial visit, but then, of course, we withheld some armaments. I told them not to go into Rafah. I wish I hadn't. I said I studied the maps. I wish I hadn't said that. I wish we would have supported our ally, Israel, so that they would not have been attacked twice by Iran. I wish we wouldn't have told them to take the win. I wish we wouldn't have said don't so many times. I wish we'd have done the border a little bit different. 10 to 15 million illegal entries in the United States is bothersome. 3.2 million illegal entries in 2023 alone. Maybe I should have done something different there. Maybe we should have finished the wall. On China, maybe we should have shot down the spy balloon earlier. Maybe we shouldn't have gone to Alaska and let Blinken and Sullivan get chewed up by their tiger diplomats in the first month of the administration. Maybe we shouldn't have sent cabinet member after cabinet member to kowtow to Xi Jinping. Maybe we ought to have said more about Taiwan and then not changed our mind, and Joe Biden was a little bit incoherent on that 3 times. Maybe we ought to stand by the Philippines. Maybe we ought to have denounced the Uyghur genocide. Maybe we ought to have stood with Jimmy Lai and all of Hong Kong. On spending, the deficit just came out this morning, $1.8 trillion in fiscal year 2024. Maybe that was a little bit high. We've increased the national debt $8 trillion. I think I probably would have done something different on the $8 trillion. I don't think we probably should have signed the Inflation Reduction Act or the first spending splurge of 2021 and 2022, which sent inflation in the grocery store up 25%. I wish we hadn't done that. I wish we had a different Department of Justice. We should not have put crazy Jack Smith in charge of prosecuting Donald Trump. We probably shouldn't have done the search warrant on a former president. Maybe Merrick Garland, I would not have someone that old and infirm running the DOJ. I don't think I would have invited, I don't think Tony Blinken's my guy. Jake Sullivan's not my guy. Lloyd Austin's not my guy. You can't blame me for them. You're certainly not going to pin KJP on me, are you? There are so many things she could have said. She could have been vague. I think I would have been a little forward-leaning with Israel. Or I think I would have pushed aid more quickly to Ukraine. Or I think I would have recommended a more youthful, energetic, and on top of it, Attorney General than Merrick Garland. I think I would have told the president it's not good to prosecute former presidents and to weaponize them. I think I would have noticed very early on that this Chinese spy balloon was not really in our best interest to allow to go unmolested across the country. I think she could have told Sonny Hostin. I think that I would not have canceled the Keystone Pipeline. I think I should have gone to the border more often. I think I ought to have been more vocal in my demands for detention centers so that we have not released more than 10 million people with pieces of paper telling them to come in. I don't think I would have wanted to lose tens of thousands of children. I think I should have done more to stop fentanyl from pouring into this country and killing hundreds of thousands of people. There are so many different ways that Kamala Harris could have answered that question. Again, the question was, if anything, Sonny Hostin's given her a wide swing at the plate. She's given her 3 pitches. If anything, would you have done something different than President Biden during the past 4 years? Anything at all. She didn't say the second anything at all. The vice president didn't pause. She said, there is not a thing that comes to mind. And I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact. Not a thing. I just ran through a few of these things. They also lost case after case at the Supreme Court. Maybe they ought not to have tried to extend the vaccine mandate. The Supreme Court blew them away on that. Maybe they ought not to have tried to forgive student loans because the Supreme Court has rebuked them on that twice. Maybe they ought not to have stood against religious liberty repeatedly in the Supreme Court because they've been brushed aside there. They've lost 9-0, some cases at the Supreme Court. 9-0, not 6-3, 9-0. There are so many things. She allegedly has a campaign. This is just me sitting down in the studio 30 minutes before going on the air telling you, I've been thinking all night long, I couldn't believe she said that. And if you're going to vote for her after she says, I'm all for what we did. Do you know there's one poll that doesn't lie? Real Clear Politics does an aggregation. Is the country headed in the right direction or is the country headed in the wrong direction? Today, the Real Clear Politics average of the right direction, wrong direction of many polls is that only 28.4% of Americans think we are headed in the right direction and 61.3% of Americans think we are headed in the wrong direction. And Kamala Harris told those 61%, pound sand. I wouldn't do a thing differently. You didn't like anything? You didn't like the fact people were falling off of airplanes at Karzai International Airport? You didn't like the fact that I told everyone I'd studied the map and Israel shouldn't go into Rafah? You don't like the fact that Israel's lost 350 soldiers in Gaza because we were staring them every step of the way? You don't like weapons cut off? Get used to it, pal, because I'm going to do everything Biden did and more. My appointees are going to be the same or worse. My spending's going $8 trillion in debt. You haven't seen anything yet once I get going. Kamala Harris, absolutely a deer in the headlight. It's The View. It's The View. She also blew 60 Minutes. She blew Howard Stern. She blew everything she did in her big media rollout. If you vote for her, you have to wonder, do you have a brain? Are you the scarecrow? Because you're voting for an empty vessel who can't think of one thing. I ask you, is there one thing you would have done differently in the past 4 years, one thing you would have done differently in the past 4 years. I got a long list, but you don't get to second guess your life. You ought to be able to reflect upon your decisions, sort the good ones from the bad ones, and get a pile of both, because we're human beings. We are not perfect, far from it. Kamala Harris, not one thing different from Joe Biden. And that means you should vote for Donald Trump, preferably today. Saying a prayer for all of our friends in Florida, because it's going to be a big storm. It's Category 5 right now, expected the weekend when it comes ashore sometime tonight. And I will be here in the morning to broadcast to those of you who only have your transistor radios about what we know. Joined by Matt Continetti. Matt is the head of domestic studies at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for the Washington Free Beacon, and of course for Commentary Magazine, where he also appears most days on Commentary's podcast. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm well. Hope you're well, too.
I am. Now, because I know you wrote the book, The Right, you know the intellectual history of the conservative movement and of the Republican Party. And you know American politics generally. So if I tell you Gerald Ford and Poland, Michael Dukakis and the tank, George H.W. Bush and looking at the watch, Mitt Romney and 47%, that all makes sense to you, right?
Absolutely. Those are signature moments in American politics, and they swung elections, I think.
I think we may have had one yesterday. I want to play for you cut number 2, Kamala Harris on The View.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
So, Matt Continetti, one more statistic before I ask you to comment on that. Real Clear Politics does an aggregator of the right direction, wrong direction, usually viewed as the key determinant of an election. Right now in America, 28.4% of the people think we're going in the right direction. 61.3% say we are going in the wrong direction. And Kamala Harris just put a bear hug around the wrong direction. What did you make of her answer?
Well, I think she didn't seem prepared to answer the question, which is odd, since she's the Democratic nominee for president, and you'd expect that she would know some of the questions that a friendly interview would give her. Now, the second thing is it was a bad answer, Hugh, because it cuts against her presentation as a change candidate in a change election. As you say, most Americans are unhappy with the direction of the country. Joe Biden continues to be deeply unpopular as a president among the American people. We don't talk about it much because he's no longer on the ticket, but he has not gained in popularity or favorability since he withdrew from the race. So you would expect Kamala Harris to want to separate herself from Biden's presidency and create a new identity, a new political identity that's more oriented toward change. She refuses to do that. And so she was quite blunt in the answer to The View. And then she gave the similar answer to Colbert later yesterday evening, that she wouldn't do anything differently. I think this is a boon for the Trump campaign.
It is. I think it is a moment like Dukakis in the tank or George W. Bush looking at his watch. Everything just fine. Let's start, Matt, and go through it. What could she said about Afghanistan? Because there's a lot of field there that not just Abbey Gate. You can talk about abandoning Bagram without telling anyone. You can talk about originally setting the date for 9/11, changing it to 8/31. You can talk about the SIV. What would she said about Afghanistan?
Well, even if she agreed with Biden's decision to withdraw on the timetable that Biden set out in agreement with the Taliban, she could have said easily that we should have been more prepared for the Taliban's assault on Kabul, and that we should have had more assets in Afghanistan to aid the evacuation, that we should have done everything we could to secure Bagram and to get our allies out and our people out. But instead, she's very close to Biden. She continues to say that not only that was the right decision to withdraw in the way that we withdrew, but that it was a courageous decision. And that's not how I see it at all.
And that she was the last person in the room to discuss it with him. Let's turn to Ukraine. What might she have said that she would have done differently about Ukraine than Joe Biden?
Well, this one is pretty easy. All she needs to say is, look, We need to get the weapons to Ukraine faster. We should have not delayed the delivery of important systems, whether it's Patriots, whether it's ATACMS, whether it's the Abrams tanks, whether it's the F-16s. And she could say, look, under my administration, I'm not going to restrict the use of these platforms. That China doesn't restrict the use of the weapons and technology they're providing Russia. Iran doesn't restrict the use of the missiles that they provide Russia that are fired into Ukraine. Why should America and the West restrict the use of the weapons we're giving our ally in its defense for its very existence? That's a pretty easy answer, I think, one she does not give.
There's another set of easy answers on policy towards Israel. What might she have said about how she would deal with Israel differently?
Well, here, Hugh, I'm going to take a moment and actually advocate plagiarism, because all Kamala Harris needs to do is plagiarize J.D. Vance's answer at the vice presidential debate, an answer he gave at a pro-Israel rally earlier this week, commemorating October 7th and memorializing the victims of the terrorist attack. I think J.D. Vance puts it very well. Israel's a good guy. Israel's our friend. Israel should be able to do what it feels is necessary to ensure its survival and to protect the Jewish people. That's all Kamala Harris needs to say. And she doesn't need to even credit J.D. Vance. I would be happy if she just stole the words from his mouth.
I too would agree with that. She stole the no tax on tips, so she's welcome to that.
Exactly.
She could also say, well, I shouldn't have said, I've studied the maps. We ought not to have held them back from Rafah. It turns out that was an important operation, and they did move 1 million people without serious injury or humanitarian crisis. But the easiest thing in the world is, I don't think we would have done the pier under President Harris, because the pier sunk.
Right.
I mean, isn't that the most obvious?
I blocked it. Yes, the total disaster of the humanitarian pier, a symbol for Biden's really clumsy and I think harmful handling of the Israel and Middle East issues over the past 10 months.
Well, let's also talk about the border now. We've had at least 10 million people cross it. In fiscal year 23, 3.2 million is the ICE number, and the estimates vary. Between 10 and 15 million people have entered the country illegally in the last 3.5, 4 years. She'd have done nothing differently, Matt Continetti. What could she say about the border that she would have done differently?
Well, it was remarkable in her interview with 60 Minutes on Monday to have the CBS News correspondent, Bill Whitaker, basically give Harris the answer, give her an opportunity to say, oh, maybe we shouldn't have reversed all of the immigration orders as rapidly as we did on day one of this administration, or maybe we should have reversed our own position and addressed this through executive order, which we said we couldn't do for years, but we finally did this past summer, and there has been some decline in the unauthorized illegal crossings at the southern border. She had every opportunity to say those things, but she couldn't. And Whitaker, I believe, offered her 3 or 4 chances in follow-up to give some sign that she recognized what a colossal error in judgment it was to open the border on the first day of the Biden administration. And Harris just cannot admit it. She doesn't recognize there's a problem, or she's offended to think that it's a problem. And she now pretends that everything is under control. This is remarkable. Hugh, the bottom line here is these interviews are conducted by friendly reporters, in many cases, I think, handpicked by Harris's campaign. And yet she cannot rise to the occasion. Every single interview she does, I think, harms her cause even further.
Your colleague, Abe Greenwald, best known for saying it's worse than that, is also known for saying interviews are her kryptonite. And Abe is right. Back to the everything is fine that happened, I'm all for it. China. She could have talked about the spy balloons. She could have said we should have stood with Jimmy Lai earlier. We should have talked about the Uyghurs. We should have had one message on Taiwan. Joe Biden's had 6. On 3 occasions, he said we would defend Taiwan. On 3 occasions, he's walked it back. She could say something about that. What could she say about China? That we would have shot the spy balloon down earlier if she'd been in charge?
A pretty easy difference. It would show that she is willing to use force, which is, a test for any wannabe commander-in-chief. And remember her convention speech where she kind of said that she wouldn't hesitate to defend the United States and our allies. One of the stronger moments of a speech that now seems kind of lost in the midst of time. But, it's something that you've been talking a lot about, Hugh. China is the missing issue of this campaign. There's a lot of talk about culture. There's a lot of talk about economics. Harris rolls out a new middle-class entitlement every other day, it seems. But the major issue confronting us in the next 25 years, the rise of the People's Republic of China, its power, its attempts to subvert the West and democracy, its effects on global trade and American workers. These issues, I think, have been neglected. And it's something that whoever wins will have to deal with very soon after taking office.
She also did not separate herself from any of the spending of the Biden administration. They have spent $8 trillion of debt. So our debt has increased $8 trillion. The best thing to look at is the debt when Trump left and the debt today, and it's $8 trillion more. Trump wasn't great on spending control either. But this spending came after the COVID spending and unleashed, as Bill Whitaker billboarded for her, 25% inflation in groceries alone. Should she have picked something on spending, Matt? Anything at all? Because she's going to spend the same amount of money, apparently.
Well, she's going to spend maybe more with all these new plans she's rolling out. And as Bill Whitaker asked in the 60 Minutes interview, how are you going to pay for it? She couldn't answer the question, given, again, multiple opportunities. Here's another issue that we're not talking about in the campaign. The debt is now more than $35 trillion. We just got word this morning that the deficit for the past year was $1.8 trillion, almost a $2 trillion deficit. The spending's on autopilot. And as you say, Biden has made it worse by loading up the federal budget with these spending plans, whether it was the rescue plan that was unnecessary and that many economists said would overheat the economy and cause inflation, which happened, whether it was the huge infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, then, of course, the huge so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which was just a green energy boondoggle disguised as some type of economic program. They've made the problem worse, and Harris is not talking about how she would address it as president. And to say, oh, well, we're going to make the rich pay more in taxes is not an answer, because there aren't enough rich to cover the debt. We're now at a place, Hugh, where service on the debt, money that just exists because of the debt we've accrued and interest rates that have gone up during the Biden administration, is now outpacing our defense budget and our expenditures on Medicaid.
Matt, I just want to spend a couple more minutes on something that the vice president said yesterday. She wouldn't change a thing. She's been in on all the major decisions. That means Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Janet Yellen, Lloyd Austin, Merrick Garland. It means KJP of all. Maybe we get 4 more years of KJP if she wins. Should she have separated? At some time, I think later in the night on Colbert, she said, we're different people, obviously. That's not an answer. Can anyone actually vote for her in good conscience after she said, I'm doing everything the same? It's like willing ourselves into decline.
There's one reason people want to vote for Hugh, and that's because she's not Donald Trump. And that's about a little bit less than half the country. And this is why this race is so close. But I want to talk about the personnel for a moment, because in one of her answers on The View, after saying there was nothing she would change, she came back to it and said, you know what, I'm going to have she realized that she's promised to have a Republican in her cabinet, but she won't say which Republican. And that's apparently the only difference between the Biden years and the possible Harris years that could be in our future.
Yeah. Matt, I want to close on that conversation I had with President Trump on Monday. The only thing they knew I was going to talk about was Israel, because I requested the interview for 10/7. And he said, and I was glad to hear it, Israel has a right to take a shot. They enjoy a right to retaliate. I applaud that. The future Prime Minister of Canada said the same thing. I don't think Team Biden wants Israel to do anything. They don't want them to hit the oil platforms, the oil storage, the IRGC headquarters, and especially what they should go for, because the door is open, are the nuclear sites. What do you think of her and him on this?
Well, I think it's a travesty, Hugh. I think if there's anything that needs to be done right now, it's the United States needs to stand with Israel in its potential retaliation for the second direct ballistic missile attack from Iran in 6 months. Biden's reasoning here is a mystery to me. He's allowed our enemies to dominate the escalation ladder in both Ukraine and the Middle East. And this is decline. There's no doubt about it. What he should be standing with our allies, and he should be coordinating with our allies, not yelling at Israel for not telling the United States what they're planning to do. Why is Israel not telling the United States what they're planning to do? Because they know that the United States will leak it and try to stop it. That is not a situation we need to be in right now. I thought President Trump's answer was strong, and I think that the difference between the candidates on this question, do we stand with Israel in the Middle East? Do we actually take this opportunity to clamp down on the Islamic Republic of Iran and its nuclear program, and maybe actually help the Iranian people end this terrible terrorist sponsoring regime? I think the difference between the two candidates is clear at this point.
You know, one last thing, we have a minute, Matt. Assault is occurring all over the United States against Jewish students and against supporters of Israel that are in the streets by people carrying Hamas and Hezbollah flags. The Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, and the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education should be all over this. She didn't say a word about this. It's as though it doesn't exist in her world. Are you shocked that the vice president doesn't care about that? 30 seconds, Matt.
I'm shocked that I also see her doing everything she can to reach out and to appease the Muslim American and Arab American communities in Michigan. This is politics. I think it's basest, and I don't think it's helping her at all. I don't think she's winning either community, Jewish Americans or Muslim Americans, out of this, and I think it helps President Trump close the gap in some of these states in the final weeks.
I hope you're right. Matt Continetti, follow him on X at Continetti. Listen to the commentary pod every day. Read him at the Washington Free Beacon whenever he writes a piece. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, you.
Joined now by Mary Catherine Ham, putting to her the same question I just put to Matt Continetti. Mary Catherine, the host of Getting Hammered. Good morning, Mary Catherine. How are you?
Hello, I'm all right.
Good. Mary Catherine, on The View yesterday, Vice President Harris, asked by Sunny Hostin if she would do anything differently from President Biden, said, nope, not a thing. I think that's up there with George H.W. Bush looking at his watch, Mike Dukakis getting in the tank. I think it's with Mitt Romney's 47% and Gerald Ford's Poland remark. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just devastating. She is running as a change agent. It's always been ludicrous, and now she's revealed how ludicrous it is. I mean, the campaign slogan is a new way forward. What exactly would you say is new? And by the way, Sunny Hostin gave her 2 bites at this, and she couldn't figure it out either time. And I think what you're right to point out, I think that George Bush looking at his watch or Dukakis in the tank, part of those were the physical manifestation of the gaffe, right? And there was a physical manifestation of this gaffe. She looks at the ceiling.
Yes.
And pauses.
Yes.
And then says, as if the ceiling tiles are going to give her answer, and then says, not one thing comes to mind. Now, what I find so mystifying about this, and even more devastating maybe than the actual answer, is that there is no answer. She has not thought for a second about answering this. And I find that insane. And if she has thought about it, it's completely left her, because you and I know, we speak publicly all the time, there's a gracious way to give an answer to this question without totally selling him out. Not that that matters to her, because she kicked his butt off the ticket anyway. But
yeah, because here's the gracious way. I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback a great man who made a difficult shit. But I think we both agree we wish we would have paid more attention to the American citizens in Kabul, the green card holders, the SIV people. We probably should have stayed at Bagram and not Karzai. We regret the deaths at Abbey Gate. And on Ukraine, maybe the president shouldn't have said a minor incursion might not lead to war. Maybe we ought to send more and let them use it more robustly. On Israel, maybe our intelligence could have been better. Israel's failed as well. But the pier was a bad idea, and I think Joe regrets the pier. She could have talked about the border, 3.2 million last year, any number of things on the border. She could talk about China and shooting down the spy balloon earlier, or standing with Jimmy Lai. Could have talked about spending. She could have talked about inflation, Keystone Pipeline, DOJ weaponization. Is there anything that she can say in a gracious way? Put yourself in that position. You're Kamala Harris. Mary Catherine Hammond, Sunny host.
What you say, yeah, I think you pick, and I'm actually, I'm going to crib this answer from a conversation I had with Guy Benson last night. We were talking about this. I think what she could do is take what is kind of a backwards-looking question and turn it forward, right? Because she doesn't want to talk about the past. But what you can do is you can telegraph that you had disagreements with the president in private. And I'm not going to get into nitties, but because she's part of the administration, there's not a great answer here unless you totally sell him out. Her tack is just to pretend she has nothing to do with it. And the problem is she ain't even good at pretending.
No, she's not. And she keeps insisting that she was in the room and that she was a big part of everything. I mean, I would go with personnel. You could say, well, look, my cabinet's going to look very different. My Department of Justice is going to be very different. I'm going to reform the border, as I've said. We're going to get There are so many things. So here's the question. Does it change any votes? Because I had former President Trump on Monday, and the distinction could not be more clear. He's going to back Israel in attacking Iran. She won't. All right. That's just one of many. Do you think she lost the election with that answer?
I think she may have, because what it feels like to me is that she nuked the possibility of convincing undecided voters with that answer, because that's what they want the answer to.
Yeah, the right way, wrong way direction. Only 28.5% of America think we're going in the right direction. 61% say we're going in the wrong direction. She put a bear hug around those numbers. She said we're staying the course.
Well, and here's what's interesting to me also is that sometimes when the polls are confusing, as they are in this election, and you're this close to the election, look at the behavior of the campaign. She has radically changed her media strategy from her hermit strategy. She has pitched this wild budget-busting Moab idea of long-term care under Medicare that just came out of nowhere. And she's starting fights with a successful governor facing a Category 5 hurricane that she's obviously going to lose and has fallen flat on her face trying to do. That guy's not even in the race. Why are you fighting with him? And I think it's because they don't feel good about their campaign. They're seeing stuff that is bad.
I'm going to talk with John Ashbrook at the beginning of the hour from the Ruthless podcast because they have the numbers. They get to see the internals because of their connections. I think she's losing badly. Yeah. You think Kamala Harris is losing?
Her behavior suggests that they are, and she knows more about her numbers than I do. Well, I shouldn't guess that. She seems to know nothing about anything. But somebody knows that her numbers are not looking right, because there's no reason to change your campaign and act in these ways, because she's a very high-risk person to put out in public. And if they're doing it, there's a reason for it. And I think it's because there's something very bad in their numbers.
Now, I have one bit of data to get you to reflect on. The Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I are still in Maine. We come back next week. And it's turned cold. Time to head south to the Beltway for the winter. And we see the ads for Only Murders in the Building and Slow Horses. They're all on Apple TV, right? And those ads include a lot of Kamala Harris ads. Now, anyone who knows Hulu ads, you buy them by region, you buy them by time, and by demographic. So they're trying to appeal to older Americans. Betsy and I are seniors. And they're trying to do so via Hulu and Only Murders in the Building and Slow Horses. I don't know what that demographic is. But the Maine is blue. The second district is red, so Trump will get one. New Hampshire should be blue, and she's using the Maine media market to reach northern New Hampshire. What's that tell you?
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds not great for her. Now, they do have money to throw around, but they also maybe aren't being if they're not being strategic with it, then that's a problem. And if they need that money there, then that's a problem.
This brings me to the last question. I've never had a producer in 25 years of this show. I've only had Dwayne. And so it's really doing a show without a producer is a little bit difficult. I am wondering, do you think she has a campaign director, or did she keep the Biden team and are they just done with her?
Well, that's kind of my theory, actually. My theory is that maybe, look, we've heard about her staff leaving in droves over the years, that she's very hard to work with. Is it possible that you got a bunch of Biden leftovers and former, like, Obama loyalists who are trying to coach an uncoachable person who is also is a mean boss? And at the end of the day, they're like, well, we did what we could. That's kind of what it feels like.
I think that could be the case. A mean
and
boss.
We cannot besmirch the name of Dwayne and compare him to former Biden campaign staff.
Yeah, he's sitting there quietly taking it, so he's not listening to the show, so he deserves everything that he gets. But you and Vic always compliment your producer, and we all know in this business nothing happens unless there's a producer. There's somebody behind the curtain at Team Kamala. It's not Doug Emhoff. He's got his own problems. I don't talk about him because they don't meet the Kavanaugh standard or the Clarence Thomas standard, so I don't talk about him. But I just think that this is what happens when you don't run a presidential campaign in the primaries. You don't know who's any good, right?
Yep. No, it seems like she's not serving herself well, and it doesn't seem like she's being served well either. And that combo will put you exactly where she was on The View yesterday.
Last question. Victor Davis Hanson, for whom I have immense respect, used to have him on all the time when I had an afternoon show, but it's too early in California to get him out of bed in Fresno, has written that he expects the continued slow deterioration of Kamala Harris's numbers based upon the accumulation of weight of her errors. I think that's persuasive. Does it persuade Mary Catherine Ham?
I'm not sure I'm ready to go there, but I read this, and I do think there is a possibility that she's in a loop and sort of maybe a downward spiral that she can't get out of, because each of these media appearances is going to be bad because she can't do them well, period. And each one of them, I mean, there was just a smorgasbord from the 60 Minutes, and then she goes on The View, which should be the easiest thing in the world. And by the way, how poetic will it be if Sunny Hostin is the one who asked her the question that brings her down?
Oh, please, God. Please. I think the tank, Poland, looking at the watch, Sunny Hostin, that is perfect. I've never met Sunny. All I know is that she appears to play a lawyer who is playing a lawyer who slept at the Holiday Inn. I mean, she really is not very good at this.
No. And she's also pretty vicious in her sort of political commentary. So, and such a Kamala partisan that it will be delightful to watch this be part of the downfall.
It will be wonderful. We're playing this clip in 10 years, and it's still appropriate. Mary Catherine Ham, good luck with the Smalls and the Youngs and everybody else you have to deal with. I appreciate it. Look forward to getting hammered with you and Vic. As I got a long drive ahead of me, I'm saving up a couple episodes because it's the one podcast that both the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I can listen to through the Bluetooth as we drive. So we're going to save up 4 or 5 episodes. Thank you, MKH.
Well, enjoy. All right, bye.
Greetings to our friends in Israel listening all across the planet. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Special treat and a burden for me. I'm breaking my fourth wall. I am entertaining a Bengals fan. John Ashbrook is one of the Ruthless podcast members. He's with the Cavalry Media Company, and he is, of course, I got my merch right here, one of the 4 co-hosts of Ruthless Podcast, which is much listened to because not only do they have good merch and they send it to me, they sent it to me last year. I want the FCC to note it's not payola. They did not require that I put them on the air. John, let's begin by talking a little football here. You're a Bengals fan. I'm a Browns season ticket holder since 1999.
Yeah.
Who has suffered more?
I think we've all suffered equally here, Hugh. The reason I'm wearing the hat is because I wanted everybody to know that there are still Bengals fans out there despite our 1-4 start. I'm really interested in what you think is going to happen.
I'm putting on my brown scarf, which is my handy merch. Keep it handy just in case you pulled this on me. Gallagher does this to me all the time. John, did you grow up in Kentucky or did you grow up? Cincinnati is basically part of Kentucky and people don't know that. Not really part of the Ohio State. Are you a Buckeye by birth or are you a Kentuckian by birth who adopted the Bengals?
I'm from Cincinnati. I grew up in Hamilton, Ohio, just a little bit east of Indiana, a little north of Cincinnati. But
well, my son went to Miami University, and we are on right now on WMUH, our great affiliate down in that neck of the woods. So you are actually a Buckeye. Are you Miami? Are you Red Hawk? I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that's where the oldest son went, who's now up on the hill. I'll have to introduce you to. Let me begin, John, by asking you the question I've asked Matt Continetti and Mary Catherine Ham over the course of the last hour. On The View yesterday, Sonny Hostin asked Kamala Harris, is there anything you do differently from Joe Biden? He said, no, there's not a thought in my mind about that. I don't have one answer for you. That's a paraphrase. I don't want to play the tape and not have this get onto the YouTube because I want people to see it. How would you, what did you think of that answer? Is it up there with Ford and Poland, Dukakis in the tank, Mitt Romney in 7%, George H.W. Bush looking at his watch? Because I think it is.
I think it's the worst possible answer she could have given. I mean, this woman is pretending to run as a change agent, and she can't even say what she would change. I mean, she is absolutely running for reelection, and it was exposed in that answer on The View. And what I don't understand is how she wouldn't have an answer ready. I mean, she looks unprepared. That's really one of the first sort of questions that you'd work through with a candidate if you're a press secretary, right? I mean, what do you disagree with? The top of your ticket. What do you agree with? I mean, it's very, very basic stuff. And yet what she cannot do is say something as simple as, well, I would have been a little tougher on the border. Well, I would have done something different on foreign policy. Well, I didn't like the way we handled something related to prices. They just pick an issue that people care about and act like you're standing up for them. But what she does over and over and over again is acts like she's standing up for the government, for Joe Biden, for Democrats. She just cannot position herself as a leader who is actually going to deliver something for the people who are going to, she's asking to depend on her.
Now, I have no business tasking the most successful conservative podcast in the world, the Ruthless Podcast, with anything. But if I were king of the forest, not Duke, not Queen, not Earl, I would ask the four of you to go around the horn when next you sit down and provide an answer to her on this. Because I think it's very easy to say, I love Joe Biden. I think he's been a magnificent public servant and he's been ill-served by the media. And while I might not have given up Bagram, or while I might not have said September 11th, or while I might not have left the billions in equipment, while I might not have stranded Americans there, or on Ukraine, I might not have mentioned a minor incursion, or I might not have put restrictions on the weapons, or on Israel, look, I wouldn't have done the pier. She could talk about any number of things while praising them. So you guys are four political professionals. Do you think you can come up with an answer to help her?
I think it's absolutely something we have to do. And I'll tell you, Hugh, like another thing she easily could have done is like say that, I agree with President Biden on so many things, but I think that we need to demand that the DHS holds FEMA accountable for their lack of work in North Carolina. It would be really easy for her to just say
that would have been a good answer.
People in North Carolina, not a lot of people in North Carolina are being critical of what the government is doing. I want a full report on what's actually happening down there. And if they're not responsive in the way they should be, heads are going to roll. That's leadership. But she is not a leader. She's acting like a public information officer for the deep state, where she's like, oh, no, FEMA is doing a great job. We're the government and we're here to help. Trust us. It's just what she presents is the absolute worst of the worst. And I think it
so now I want to get you guys on Ruthless are sort of a quartet of fan dancers. You refer to numbers that the audience do not see. You refer to internals to which we do not have access. And none of my buddies, no one tells me what the real numbers are, and I don't trust the public polling. I do know the right way, wrong way numbers are 61% wrong direction and 28% right direction, and Kamala Harris just put a big bear hug on that. She loves the wrong direction we're going in. What are the numbers that you guys tease at? What do you think the election is right now?
Well, the truth of the election is it's really coming down to three states. I mean, if you look at the states that were the most competitive in 2020, states like Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina, those states all seem to be trending towards President Trump. But there are three that are toss-ups right now: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I think those are going to be very tight right down to the end. And with, good reason. They were tight in 16, they were tight in 20, they're going to be tight again in 2024. So if you're watching states that are going to be the closest, those are the three to watch. And those three states also have Senate races happening. So there's some sort of, there's cross pressure happening in those among those electorates, Hugh. But those are the three that are the tightest.
What's interesting about those three Senate Republicans, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, Mike Rogers in Michigan, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, they are great candidates. So there's no one dragging Trump down. They actually are going to help him in those three states. So do you think you have a turnout model that is at all reliable? Because we were surprised by turnout in 2016, by turnout in 2020. I don't know how pollsters are modeling this election. What do you think?
Well, I think the Republicans have done a lot of work to improve upon what we did in 2020. Of course, the Trump campaign is very professionalized this time. They are run by two seasoned people, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, who actually have had an entire career practicing and succeeding, but also had a primary season of practicing and succeeding. Remember how much they worked to turn people out in Iowa, turn people out in New Hampshire against a very big field of other Republican primary contenders. So they have practice, and the campaign itself is ready to go in terms of turning people out. And now Republicans have an apparatus that looks a little bit more like Democrats. So that we interviewed a girl, you may know Jessica Anderson from Sentinel Action Fund. They are focused. The Sentinel Action Fund is a group that's focused on making sure that the people who have a low voting propensity but are likely to vote for Republican actually turn out, make sure they get the touches from personal people in their neighborhoods who they know. And so there is a whole apparatus that Republicans have this cycle that we didn't have in 20, and I think that's going to work to our benefit.
John, how much time do you give to Ruthless now, and how much time do you give to Cavalry, which is your political consulting, business consulting firm?
That's a great question. I give everything I've got to both. And the nice thing with Ruthless is we've got a production team, and they handle a lot of the day-to-day stuff. And so when the four of us get together in the studio, we really just sit down and start talking. And then when we're done, which sort of limits the time commitment. We're only 2 days a week up until this month when we're adding a third episode. But we are Hugh, it does take some time, but it's a labor of love.
Oh my goodness, it is so well produced. I want people to listen to Ruthless. I do tell people it's PG-13 most of the time. Occasionally it gets R. Smug is the R. John is the PG because he's from Ohio. And the other two are PG-13. John, I'm in Maine with my wife. We are leaving next week back to the Beltway. Maine has the Portland media market, and nobody tries to reach the 2nd District because it's too far away and there's nobody up there that's going to vote for Trump. He'll get one electoral college vote. But it's a blue state. Maine's a blue state. New Hampshire is supposed to be a blue state, but we watch, we're senior citizens. We're over 62. We watch Only Murders in the Building, which is our demo. We watch Slow Horses, which is our demo. There are lots of Kamala Harris ads. And my wife's a little bit stunned by this. I'm not at all, but what do the fact that Kamala is advertising in the Portland, New Hampshire, northern New Hampshire market tell you?
It tells me that she is concerned. Well, it tells me two things. One is that she has just an incredible amount of money. I mean, you've read about how much money her campaign has and her super PAC has. There was a story 3 weeks ago that they were putting $320 million directly into digital advertising. That is a budget that just supersedes Republican outside spending almost in total. So they have endless amounts of money on the Democrat side. They can spend it everywhere. Two, it tells me that she is worried about traditionally Democratic strongholds like New Hampshire and Maine. And if Trump and Trump allies had the resources to be able to push advertising in those areas, they would. And there is some targeted ads in those parts of the country. Definitely not as widespread as what Kamala is pushing, but most of the Trump effort is more on like face-to-face, door-to-door, volunteer, grassroots. So I think, Hugh, that Democrats are rich and they're scared.
John, I have one other alternative answer very quickly. Maybe the Harris campaign is run by people who are either incompetent or B, don't like her because she inherited them from Biden. And again, after yesterday's media disaster tour, so it's sort of like the worst rock and roll band tour. It's like a Spinal Tap tour for a political candidate. What do you think her team is any good?
I think that they struggle. I mean, if her prep for these interviews is any guide, I think they really, really struggle. But also, the team is only as good as the candidate. Maybe they put briefing books in front of her and ad plans in front of her, and she either doesn't read them or doesn't understand them or can't execute or something. Like she is not very good herself, and so. Maybe there is something to your theory that the Biden team just hates her. I mean, it certainly seemed that way when Biden walked out into the press briefing room and said, "No, she agreed with everything I do," which is
really... the silver lining for Republicans if Trump loses is that they're going to crush her and the Democrats for the next two elections. The silver lining for the Democrats, if she loses, is that they're going to crush Trump and the Republicans in the next two elections. Those are pretty real silver linings, aren't they?
Well, 26 will be a difficult cycle for Republicans in the Senate either way. It's a much different map than what we have right now. And whether Trump wins or Kamala wins, it's going to be really hard for us. But if Kamala wins, it is going to be just extremely difficult for Democrats to take a majority in the Senate in 26 because no one's going to be able to explain what it is that she's doing on a daily basis. They can't hide her forever. And remember, like last year at this time, everybody was making fun of her. The media was making fun of her. Everybody was saying, "Oh,
and we're making fun of her right now." John, you know what a heart out is. I got a heart out. Thank you so much. Everyone go and watch Ruthless Podcast. That's John Ashbrook. Forgive him his Bengals sins. They are many. I'll be right back. We've got to take care of this deficit, this debt that grew so dramatically last year, $1.8 trillion. It's gone up $8 trillion under Joe Biden, $8 trillion. And for what? What has it done for you? Nothing. Americans for Prosperity will explain to you how to get out. You got to go to americansforprosperity.org to do that. All right, that's the pretty easy part. Canada has a new future premier in Pierre Poilievre. How do I say it, Dwayne? Pierre Poilievre. Pierre something or other. Well, Pierre is going to be the prime minister. And Pierre said this to Canadian broadcast yesterday about Israel and Iran, cut number 14.
Yesterday you said that you endorse Israel proactively defending itself by hitting Iran's nuclear sites, which is something that President Joe Biden does not endorse. Do you not feel like this could lead to a likelihood of an all-out conventional war between Iran and Israel? And do you not agree with Joe Biden and his assessment?
I think the idea...
What is the age of that reporter? Anyone want to guess? Do you think that reporter is 25? There's up-talking going on, and it's 4 questions, and it's not what do you think, but what do you think about what other people think. It's a terrible question. Pierre answers this way.
Allowing a genocidal, theocratic, unstable dictatorship that is desperate to avoid being overthrown by its own people to develop nuclear weapons is about the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that the world could ever allow. And if Israel were to stop that genocidal, theocratic, unstable government from acquiring nuclear weapons, it would be a gift by the Jewish state to humanity.
I just think he's fabulous. He's fabulous. Now, Molly Ball was on CNN yesterday talking about Sonny Hostin's comments on The View. Here's what Molly Ball said, cut number 13.
Done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years.
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Molly, what do you make of that?
I'm surprised, frankly, that she doesn't have more to say about this, given that she and her campaign know that this is one of the main questions that voters have about her. And one of the main things she's been trying to establish as part of her candidacy is the idea that she would represent a break from the past 4 years, and to not be able to come up with something say in that moment. She continues to not be particularly nimble on her feet in a lot of these interviews, and this is a very obvious question that gave her an opportunity, frankly.
That's very generous. Not particularly nimble. How about she face planted and it's over? Kamala Harris is going to lose. No one's going to vote. I mean, no serious person is going to vote for her. Joined now by Congressman Michael Waltz, he of Florida's 6th Congressional District. Good morning, Congressman. I think Milton is headed your way after it comes in somewhere south of Tampa Bay, somewhere north of Sarasota. Then it's going to crow across the peninsula. Does it look like your district is in its path?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Hugh. We are in its path. It will pass through the western part of my district, which is northeast of Orlando. It'll essentially follow what we call the I-4 corridor from Tampa through Orlando and exit near Daytona. And as I've been telling every one of my constituents, it's expected to exit after crossing over land still as a hurricane. So we get a 1-2 punch. We get hit from the west, where it's flooding our lakes, rivers, the intercoastal waterway. And then as it passes back into the Atlantic Ocean, the wind whips around and hits us from the east, and from like a counterclockwise right hook. So it's a 1-2 punch. The ground is already incredibly saturated. And then that flooding moves. It has to exit somewhere. So it moves like this big bubble, flooding communities as it goes to the exit of the rivers out into the ocean. So this is gonna be more than a one-day recovery. And prayers, all the prayers that we can lift for the Tampa Bay community. And just a few things, Hugh, from a national security standpoint. You have right there in Tampa Bay, MacDill Air Force Base, which is the home of our Special Operations Command and its headquarters, and our Central Command and its headquarters that right now is in the middle of dealing with what's going on in the Middle East. So you've got some national security impacts there as well.
Great point, and prayers for everyone involved. I don't presume to give anyone advice 24 hours before a hurricane hits, but talk to your local people, listen to your AM stations. They'll be giving you direction throughout. Congressman, while we can talk, and we may be out of touch for a few days, congratulations on Hard Truth. My copy of your new book arrived yesterday. We'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. Publication isn't for a week, and people can order Hard Truths at Amazon. What I want to talk to you about is some hard truths about Vice President Harris on with Sunny Hostin yesterday. Sunny asked her, anything you do differently? The vice president said, nothing occurs to me at the moment. Now, the right way, wrong way number in the United States, 28.5% of Americans think we're going in the right direction. 61.3% think we're going in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris just put a big bear hug around the wrong direction. What did you make of that answer? Not one thing comes to her mind that she would do different over the past 3.5 to 4 years.
You know, the first, when I saw the reporting of that, because of course I don't watch that show, the first thing I thought, Hugh, was finally she got asked that question. I've been waiting. Of course, she's been dodging the media left, right, and center. But during the debate, somewhere to ask that question, what did you agree with? What would you do differently in the last 4 years? At first, no surprise, she didn't seem prepared for it. She kind of stuttered and stumbled her way through the initial part of the answer. And then, I think that was an honest moment because she was the last person in the room. As you know, the National Security Council consists of the vice president and the key cabinet agencies. And then secondarily, Biden took such a hard left turn in governing when he cut a deal with Bernie in order to get Bernie's support in the primary as one of the nation's leading progressives. She agrees with all of the progressive policy. And what I wish we would play more often is Bernie Sanders on CNN saying Biden and Harris have had the most progressive, left-leaning administration since FDR, and how proud Bernie is of them, and he expects that to continue under the Harris administration. So no surprise here, Hugh.
Congressman Waltz, I'm old enough to remember and was part of the Ford campaign in Massachusetts. And when Jerry Ford said Poland was free, I put my head in my hands and I said, "Oh, that's terrible." There are those moments, Mike Dukakis in the tank, George H.W. Bush looking at his watch, Mitt Romney saying 47% of the people and binders of women. There are moments that stick and hurt. I think yesterday on The View may have been the final straw for some people because 61% of the country think we're going in the wrong direction. Grocery inflation's 25%. She could have at least said we ought to have handled Afghanistan better. I mean, how could she have answered that and diplomatically been respectful of the president who is retiring and nevertheless distinguish herself from the president who is retiring?
Well, I think one of the things, if I were advising her, since she already completely and shamelessly flip flop on fracking, one, number two, she badly needs Pennsylvania, and number three, it is the greatest driver of inflation. I think every American instinctively understands that. And the famous line from Obama is, "I see gas prices going up, then he sees his poll numbers going down," is to say, well, I think we could have done better on energy policy. I would lift the LNG ban. I agree that we should have fracking. It would also it would have pulled away from something President Trump is hammering away. So she could have chosen like one single issue like that to say, you know what, I'm going to start doing things differently when I'm in charge. But one, I don't think she has a real plan except more of the same of what they're currently doing.
One of the things I came up with, obviously, Afghanistan, you don't leave Bagram, you don't leave the equipment, you don't leave Americans, green card holders, and SIV people.
I don't
But
think
just
she could
if
have
you
done
wanted
that
to go,
with I don't think she could have done that one without, just pulling the rug out from under Biden, who has blatantly said it was an outstanding success. But I wish she would.
Okay,
I
could
wish
she have
would
done
for the sake
this?
of our veterans.
Could she have said, well, if I were the president, I wouldn't have encouraged Putin by making the minor incursion comment, or I wouldn't put restraints on our weapons, or the very easiest one, Congressman Walt, I don't think I would have come up with the pier in Gaza, which sunk. Because, I mean, that was just a fiasco, an utter fiasco. Can she distance herself from utter fiascos?
I don't think she can distance herself when it comes to the Israel or the Palestine issue at all, because they are petrified about Michigan, and we're seeing the numbers trending our way in Michigan. And the Trump campaign, led by Rick Grinnell, a number of Arab Americans, and others, have heavily engaged in the Arab American community there, including the Chaldean Christians, a lot of Middle Eastern Christians, and others. And they have had it with both Biden and Harris. So I hear you. She should have had something ready to go if she were ever finally asked that question, which should have been the first, second, and third question asked by any journalist of a vice president running while still sitting underneath the president. What do you agree with? What would you do differently? But man, I don't think she would have gotten away with that one, because they're petrified of losing that community in Michigan, the uncommitted that drove in the dead of the Michigan winter during a Democrat primary, over 100,000 of them, just to register a protest vote against Biden and Harris.
Congressman Waltz, I asked former President Trump on Monday about the numbers in Michigan because the Arab American Institute has a poll out that shows Trump ahead among Arab Americans in Michigan, 42 to 41%. Now, that's margin of error. I asked him why, because he's a very staunch supporter of Israel and wants a response against Iran. He said they want peace. They want the Abraham Accords back. And, that makes sense. Right. If you'd like things to settle down, you want Trump back.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the one answer. And I think the Abraham Accords should be on the tip of the tongue of every surrogate, the president, the vice president. We've got to constantly remind people every time they turn on their television and see ballistic missiles flying, are reminded that our hostages are still, a year later, sitting in the tunnels of Gaza, that just 4 years ago, we were signing peace deals worthy of multiple Nobel Peace Prizes on the White House lawn. Abraham Accords, Abraham Accords, Abraham Accords, and reminding people of just how badly things have deteriorated around the world on Biden and Harris's watch. I also, if you remember, Hugh, I remember the countdown clock when the Iranians were holding Americans hostage in our embassy, and every day you turned on the nightly news, it was 350 days, 400 days, and it just kept ticking. I think we should have the same thing for how long our Americans have been sitting in those tunnels, getting tortured, raped, brutalized, and held as human shields for the diabolical madman that Sinwar is. Great piece in the Wall Street Journal, really highlighting what an evil son of a what that he is, and his first message out to Hamas as he took charge after the Israelis took out Hania in Tehran was, let's go back to suicide bombing. We need to amp it up. Hamas is not interested in peace. Sinwar is a modern day Osama bin Laden, Baghdadi Hitler, and we have to let and help the Israelis take him out. There will not be peace as long as Sinwar is alive and as long as Iran is flush with cash to sow chaos with its proxies.
She could have said anything about Iran that she wanted to, anything about Sinwar. She could have even said, look, we're going to have a different communication strategy and thrown KJP under the bus, but she didn't. So the question is, Mike, you have been out on the campaign trail with former President Trump. Great interview with him on Monday. I thought he's tanned, rested, and ready. Do you think he's going to win?
I do think he's going to win, Hugh. If you want to just go to the data standpoint, he is outperformed by a couple, even several points. His polling, both in 16 and in 20, and the polling had him much further behind in both those cycles than it does where he's tied or ahead in nearly every swing state. And at the end of the day, people are going to vote on those economic issues and those kitchen table issues. They had more money in their wallet. Their family felt safer in terms of crime. People have had it with the border, and her attempts to flip-flop and have a 20-minute visit, I think, have ringed as hollow. And then on foreign policy, I think it just goes to the general issues of strength versus weakness, chaos versus stability. And we're hearing that stop after stop. I had the honor to go with him to Butler, and what an amazing, epic rally.
I didn't know that. Now, congratulations on that. I know you're in your district now. Good luck to everyone in the path of Milton. I know Congressman Walz and his team will be working on your behalf. Thank you for joining me this morning, Congressman. We're watching Milton. It will make landfall sometime today. In the meantime, I'm going to talk with Olivia Beavers of Politico. She's been following Speaker Mike Johnson around. I just put on X your article on that. Where have you been and what have you seen, Olivia?
So, Hugh, I was one of the reporters, I think, granted the first opportunity to travel with Johnson for campaign-related purposes. And so we went through Texas. We hit two different battleground districts, one for Mayra Flores, who is trying to return to the House and unseat Vicente Gonzalez. And then the second was for Monica de la Cruz, who is facing a returned Democratic challenger who has moved more center from kind of more progressive tendencies. And then we did a campaign rally outside of Dallas in Arlington, Texas. And the speaker is both rolling out sort of a new pitch for why Republicans should serve in the majority, but he's also introducing himself. So he was playing this video of his wife talking about his childhood, his parents raising him from a very young age, and his dad being a firefighter. And I thought that was really interesting because Mike Johnson, as he told me later in an interview, knows that a lot of people don't really know him, and he hasn't had a ton of time to introduce himself as he's been putting out various fires in Congress. And we also got to break down a lot about his relationship with Trump.
Were you there at the second assassination attempt, Olivia?
I was not there. Not where?
In Mar-a-Lago.
I was not there, but the speaker was. And he said he was actually already on his way to Mar-a-Lago because he wanted to talk to Donald Trump about the short-term spending bill and a few other legislative priorities. He said as his plane had basically just landed, his security detail came up to him and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this. There's been a second assassination attempt against Donald Trump." So they were in a holding pattern for about 45 minutes on the airfield while Donald Trump was in some sort of security zone, not even at Mar-a-Lago. And so afterwards, the speaker and his wife, Kelly, were able to be, I guess, one of the first people to talk to Donald Trump afterwards. And he said it was more matter of fact than, nerves or saying, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" He was just like, "Wow, this is crazy. I can't believe this happened again." And of course, Donald Trump remarked that he wanted to finish his golf game.
Now, Olivia, we know that he's working with a 5-vote majority. What is the best case scenario that he sees coming out of this election?
I think that, at least on this trip, one thing that was really notable when I was doing an interview, mid-interview, Donald Trump called him right after his return to Butler, Pennsylvania, where his first assassination attempt was. And I thought that this was really sort of illuminating that one of the early calls that he was placing was to the speaker. Now, Mike Johnson's ideal scenario is gaining maybe at least a dozen seats, which, I think the polls suggest that things are going to be quite tight. So we might actually just be looking at another pretty thin razor majority. But if he can grow the seats, he has less of a math problem. He has more of an ability to not have the various detractors and public critics like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Thomas Massey, who led the ouster event against him earlier this year, which, never even made it to a floor vote. That will help protect him. And if Donald Trump's in office and Trump continues to endorse him, that is his safe space. That is where he's protected and he can have his first full term as speaker.
Yeah, those people that you just mentioned are what's holding him back. If he can add a half dozen seats to the 5-seat majority, he's got more room. If he adds a dozen, he's got a lot of room. And then the reconciliation process can work, and it can work quickly. Last question, Olivia Beavers. If he has the majority and if the Senate has flipped to red and President Trump wins, does he have a plan to move fast? Because Republicans always seem to get the majority and then wander around for a while until they figure out what they want to do.
Yes, and he actually mentioned that in his interview. He said that, I don't know if he used the word nightmares, but that's the word that's coming to me. He said, Republicans are still, I think, kind of kicking themselves after Donald Trump's first term when they weren't really expecting him to win. And then he won, and they weren't really ready to hit the ground running. So he says he wants Congress to be ready this time around to just be ready to start moving his policies and priorities.
Yeah, they need a budget so that if they get a budget out of the Budget Committee that's agreed to by the Senate, they can do reconciliation with a simple majority in the Senate. But that takes planning. Do you think it's underway?
Oh, I'm sure it's underway. And I also imagine there's going to be an element of that with the transition team, but I don't know that much about what they're really working on because that's going to be a bunch of different stuff. But I know that those discussions are already being held in the House. And I think that the speaker has, since he brought that up in our interview, I think that's something that he's been thinking about.
Eric Hovde joins me now. Eric, we always get your name mangled. I've decided it's like hover. Eric Hovde. Am I right?
Hovde.
Hovde. Well, whatever it is, we're very glad to have you back because you've closed the gap with Tammy Baldwin. I think it's a statistical tie. Am I right?
That's the case. We are absolutely down to a jump ball race, and I plan on winning this, Hugh, but I need a lot of help. So things are going well.
I have posted your website because I want people to go and make a small dollar donor here because we got to get troops out in the field, micro targeting, turn out the vote, GOTV, $25, $50, $100 helps Eric win. What's the money situation like, Eric?
Look, she takes all the special interest money. So she takes money from big tech, big pharma, which, by the way, she regulates, and her partner invests in, and they don't disclose it. She basically lives on Wall Street with her Wall Street partner, even though she's run against Wall Street and wealth inequality, and the wealthy don't pay their fair share. So, yeah, she's got plenty of money. But look, we I've made a big investment. Donations have been coming in, which I really greatly appreciate. I can't tell you how much I really appreciate everybody's assistance on my behalf. So, look, it's just going to be running hard all the way to the finish line. It's 27 days out. The momentum is on our side, which is, momentum is so important in the world of business and sports and in politics. It's absolutely critical. So, as I say, look, it's a limited amount of time. I've been in this race for almost 9 months, running it hard every day. I feel like I'm in a marathon. I'm about the 22-mile mark, and you still got a fair amount of distance to go, but you're getting tired at times. But thank God blessed me with a lot of energy and thick skin. But you can see the finish
I've
line.
never. I haven't done a marathon in 18 years. I used to do them fairly regularly. And mile 20 is the rough mile. 22, you've gone through the wall, the proverbial wall, and you're headed to the finish. Nevertheless, Eric, on Monday I had Derek Van Orden on, Congressman Van Orden. On Tuesday I had Senator Johnson on, and today you're on. The reason is very simple. Turnout matters in Wisconsin. It's the burned over country. You've had like 1,000 elections in 10 years. How do you feel about your get out the vote effort?
I feel good about it. There's several groups in our state working hard on my behalf and our own efforts and the party efforts. So yeah, I feel pretty good about it. But really, it really comes down to me, Hugh, more so than anything, is everybody who's listening grabbing their neighbor, their friends, their siblings, and just saying, "Hey, did you go out and vote? We got to get out and vote." That is the most effective strategy. And that's what I've been saying through this whole thing. We've got to get everybody in the middle, low propensity voters. I mean, Hugh, you know this. It's just stunning the amount of hunters that don't vote. It's stunning the amount of people that sit in a church pew every weekend that don't vote. I don't get it. They care about their Second Amendment. They care about religious freedom. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I believe what the left has become is just crazy. So I think it's imperative that we get out and vote.
Eric, I was listening to the Ruthless podcast with J.D. Vance. They went fishing in Michigan. And J.D. was pointing out that the outdoorsmen in Michigan don't vote as the normal. They're underperforming the state. I can't believe that, but apparently it's true in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania too, is that the outdoors community, hunters, fishermen, they do not vote in the same numbers as the rest of the state, which is astonishing to me because the federal government wants to shut them down. Let's tell people your background, because Tammy Baldwin is as left as they come. What is Eric's background?
Look, I'm a career. She's a career politician. I'm a classic entrepreneur. I started my first company. First of all, I'm fourth generation Wisconsinite. Born, raised, went to public schools, went on to University of Wisconsin. Started my first company in my 20s, and then started building multiple different companies throughout my career. My main businesses are banking and real estate development. I have a real estate development company in Wisconsin, and then I have a banking business that operates throughout the Rocky Mountain states and the West Coast, and even in Florida, and have offices on the West Coast of Florida. So I'm worried about my team there with the hurricane coming. But I also
we just talked with Mike Waltz about that. They're getting ready. Eric, you mentioned the real estate, and I want to ask you this because I asked former President Trump this on Monday, and I ask anyone who actually knows about real estate. I'm a retired lawyer, but from 1989 to 2016, I represented real estate developers. Kamala Harris is out there saying, and Tammy Baldwin saying, we're going to build 3 million houses. The federal government doesn't build any houses, at least efficiently. They might throw up 1 or 2 Section 7 units that are ridiculously expensive. When you hear her say that, what do you think? Because they don't know how to allocate resources. They don't know how to build anything.
Look, it's economic incompetency. Every time I hear her talk, I mean, price controls, we're going to send $25,000 to everybody to buy a home. All you're going to do is jack up homes by $25,000, create another bubble, and then it'll collapse. Look, you have to create a playing field. You have to speed up the entitlement process. You have to take out the impact fees and all the regulatory and back taxes that are layered into housing. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that 25 to 30% of the cost of a house today to build a home is tied into taxes and regulations. That's absurd. So I know how to fix housing, but I could spend an hour here talking to you. That's the problem where we stand in this country today. We have career politicians that know nothing what they're talking about, like Tammy Baldwin, because she's never operated in the real world, trying to design economic policies that only make matters worse. And what we need is people that actually come from the real world who understand how these problems exist and go about getting them fixed.
Now, Eric, you're a strong supporter of Israel. Tammy Baldwin is part of Team Biden, which cannot decide what to do and built the pier and said don't go into Rafah. Does that come up much on the trail, Israel?
For the Jewish community, absolutely. But I would say the two biggest issues that I hear consistently is obviously the economy, inflation. People have been crushed. And then secondly, the border. Every state's a border state. It's the crime that's come into our country. Look, there's no such thing, back to economics. The Democrats don't understand there's no such thing as a free lunch. And when you have, 16, $20 million illegal immigrants using our health care and not paying anything into it, that cost gets transferred to all of us here in America. Obviously, it's compounding the housing problem. The fentanyl crisis is a real crisis. We've lost over 100,000, largely young people, the last few years in this country due to that poison coming from China that goes to the drug cartels, comes up over our southern border. And, Hugh, the one thing I didn't mention about my background is I've had a foundation for over 25 years and focused on a variety of things, rescuing abandoned children. I have Hovde homes around the world that are rescuing children out of the sex trade, out of abandonment, out of crises. And they can't account for 100,000 children at our southern border. And sadly, I can say a lot of those children have probably ended up in the sex trade. So they've created
it is. It's a great tragedy. It's a tragedy that President Trump brought up on Monday, and it doesn't get any attention, and I'm glad you do that. I didn't know about your Hovde homes. I want people to know about your website, Eric Hovde, EricHovde.com. Go and make a small dollar donor. We can win this. I look forward on election night to seeing the red check mark go up when they project Eric as won. We got time for one quick question, Eric. Madison is the heart and soul of the Democratic turnout machine. Are you making inroads in your alma mater or hometown?
I am. Look, it's interesting. The Wisconsin State Journal was doing an article about why there's so many Hovde signs in the Madison area, which was great. I was born and raised in there. I'm born and raised in the belly of the beast, but I'm a diehard conservative. It's funny when you're conservative and you live like in a town like Madison or Berkeley, it makes you actually more conservative because you see how insane their policies are.
And you learn how to answer their objections. Eric Hovde, great to have you. People, go and help him and get out the vote. Go and get involved in the campaign. If you've never been in a campaign, this is a great one. It could be a 10-vote race. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I have posted, actually Harley has already posted my opening monologue today, and I'm going to do something I never do. I would like to ask you to go to YouTube, to the Hugh Hewitt account. Of course, I hope you subscribe to it, but I would like you to send that monologue to your family and friends, because I was up last night thinking, how could she have answered that way? Sunny Hostin, let's play what she did on The View yesterday, cut number 2.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
It's just extraordinarily maybe the worst answer ever. I know George H.W. Bush looked at his watch in the town hall. I know Jerry Ford said Poland was free. I know Mitt Romney got eavesdropped on, said 47%. He mentioned binders of women. I know Mike Dukakis got in the tank. There have been terrible moments before. That's the worst moment in modern American political history. The right way, wrong way numbers. 28% of America think we're going in the right direction. 61% say we're going in the wrong direction. And Kamala Harris just got on the wrong direction horse and said, giddy up, in the wrong direction. She did it again last night, by the way. She went on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Her media blitz has been a disaster. She's like thrown herself off of 4 buildings in a row. 60 Minutes, The View, Howard Stern, and then last night, cut number 17, talking about Israel. We have never been close to a deal. Sinwar is a nut, a crazy fanatic. All right? It's in the Wall Street Journal today. We've known it forever. That's an inane answer, but it's not as inane as the one she gave on The View. She wouldn't do a thing differently. The pier. You'd send a second pier to sink with the first pier off Gaza. You would not let Ukraine use the weapons that you didn't send. You would repeat what Joe Biden said, a minor incursion, that's okay in Ukraine, or just Afghanistan. You wouldn't do a thing differently in Afghanistan. There's still Americans trapped in Afghanistan. There's still SIV eligible Afghan interpreters still trapped there under the Taliban. You would not do a thing differently. It's astonishing. Senator Tom Cotton is next. We're going to review that most amazing, that really amazing moment where Kamala Harris said she wouldn't change a thing. Stay tuned. I'm joined now by United States Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be back on with you.
I had Congressman Waltz on earlier. I know you're worried about the people in Milton's path. Can you explain for me whether or not FEMA has money? Because Secretary Mayorkas said they're out of money, but I thought you just passed a CR.
Yeah, so Hugh, I think FEMA has enough money for now to engage in the vital rescue operations that are unfortunately still going on in the Appalachian mountains in Carolina, in western North Carolina, and eastern Tennessee and northern Georgia. Obviously, when it gets to recovery operations, that's probably going to require some more money. But at the moment, I think they have enough money to probably take us through the election when Congress is back in session. Obviously, Congress will monitor that, and if we need to provide more funds to FEMA before we come back after the election in November, then we can do that. I will note, Hugh, that this administration didn't come to us when we passed that stopgap resolution last month and say, you know, we really need to move a little bit of money from this pot to that pot or the other pot, which is something that happens all the time, Hugh. And I'd also just observe that when this administration wants to spend money on its priorities, on building that dumb pier off of the coast of Gaza, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to pay off student loans for graduate programs in gender studies. It doesn't seem to have any trouble finding money.
Now, Senator, you've led me to Vice President Harris on The View yesterday. I want to play for people who have been underground or without communication what she said yesterday on The View when Sonny Hostin asked her a very simple question, cut number 2.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Senator Cotton, how do you react to that? Not a thing would she do differently?
Well, it's an astonishing and revealing answer, Hugh, that Kamala Harris is simply more of the Biden administration, probably worse, given that she's more left-wing, more radical, and even less competent, as hard as that is to believe, dealing with Joe Biden. So if you want to return to the good times of the Trump era with prosperity, safety, security, then vote for Donald Trump. If you want 4 more years of what we've received from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, vote for her. But I can give her some advice. I know she flubbed the question on some late-night TV show as well last night. She should just listen to what my kids or your grandkids sometimes say. It's opposite day. And just apply that to the administration. Opposite administration. Whatever Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done for the last nearly 4 years, in retrospect, they should have probably done the exact opposite thing, and we'd all be better off.
You know, former President Trump told me that on Monday. He said Joe Biden's the worst foreign policy president in history, and if we'd just done the opposite of everything he'd said. And he's right. He's echoing Secretary Gates. Let's run through a few. You mentioned the pier. She could have said, the pier was not a good idea. We're not doing a pier again. I guess we're in for a second pier if she wins.
Well, you can see that because her rhetoric about Israel's existential war against Iranian-backed terrorists like Hamas and Hezbollah always pays lip service very briefly to Israel and its need to kill these bloodthirsty terrorists, but then immediately and extendedly focuses on the need to provide humanitarian aid into Gaza and Lebanon. That's not our responsibility. That's not Israel's responsibility. That's a responsibility of Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran for using those civilian populations as human shields and firing points. But again, it's just another example of how she puts more pressure on Israel than she does on Iran or its terror proxies, even as she's admitting, Hugh, that Iran is our greatest enemy. Now, I would disagree with that. Iran is a mortal, implacable foe, of course, but China is clearly a more dangerous enemy than Iran. But second, even if she thinks Iran is our greatest enemy, why has she given them over $100 billion of economic relief and sanctions waiver? Why did they lift the embargo on their missile program, the missiles that were shot into Israel just last week? So, again, these interviews are revealing Kamala Harris to be the San Francisco liberal she always has been.
When she says, I can't think of anything, and she also says I was the last person in the room, often I go back to Afghanistan. Joe Biden originally set the date for 9/11. He realized that was bad. He moved it not backwards, but forwards to 8/31. He left Bagram. He left the equipment. He left Americans, green card holders, citizens, green card holders, and SIV eligible Afghans who'd worked with it. She wouldn't change a thing, Senator Cotton. Isn't that somewhat stunning?
It is remarkable. And Hugh, let me tell you this. Let me pull back the curtain a little bit. It is widely known in Washington that almost every advisor, civilian and military, to Joe Biden recommended against what he did in Afghanistan. It is widely expected that when Joe Biden leaves office, those people, especially the civilians who worked in his White House and his State Department, his Pentagon, are going to throw him under the bus and say the old man wouldn't listen to us. He was too stubborn. He had a chip on his shoulder because Barack Obama didn't do exactly what he had recommended in 2009. We tried to warn him against this. So that is the word on the street in Washington, D.C. among the Democratic foreign policy elite. Yet Kamala Harris alone is still vocally and enthusiastically standing by Joe Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which ignited so much of the chaos and war we see around the world by telling people like Vladimir Putin or the Ayatollahs that they could walk all over and push around Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
She also did not separate herself, but endorsed President Biden's 100% his Ukraine policy. That includes, of course, when he said a minor incursion wouldn't be so bad, but it includes delaying weapon shipments and putting restrictions on weapon shipments. So I guess more of the same there. Money after money after money, but restricted money so that they cannot win.
Yeah, that must be the case, Hugh. Again, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris tempted Vladimir Putin to do what he's always wanted to do, which is reassemble the old Russian Empire, the most important part of which for him is Ukraine. And then after they failed to deter that war, unlike Donald Trump, I have to add, they pussyfooted around for now nearly 3 years, not providing Ukraine what they needed to win. This is consistent, too, by the way, with what they've done in Israel as well. They will not allow our allies to win the wars in which they're engaged. They won't even speak words like victory or win. It's always de-escalate, smooth over tensions. It's hard for a country like Israel, Ukraine to de-escalate when they're being invaded by people that want to wipe them off the map.
On Israel, I could name a number of things she could have said. She could have said, I would not allow our UN ambassador to withhold the veto on the Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire without mentioning the hostages. Joe Biden did that. She's got no problem. The border, of course, 10 to 15 million people across the border, nothing different. China, she could have said, I'd shoot down the spy balloon earlier. She could have said, I'd stand with Jimmy Lai, or I would have brought up the Uyghurs. She can't think of one thing, Senator Cotton. It's remarkable.
Yeah, and again, remember, Hugh, how Kamala Harris got this nomination to where she was. She didn't earn it. She was gifted it at the last minute. Now, say what you will about Donald Trump or Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton. I understand they're not every American's cup of tea. Some Americans are very, very strongly opposed to them from both parties. But all those men earned their nomination. Even the losers in presidential elections, they still earned it. They went through their paces for 18 months of town halls and bus stops in Iowa and debates and interviews. Kamala Harris was gifted this nomination. And what you're seeing now is what happens when someone is gifted a nomination and they don't have the ability, they don't have the conviction to explain to America the direction they want to lead our country. It's not a surprise to anyone who knows Kamala Harris that she cannot handle interviews on, for goodness sakes, The View.
The View.
She didn't come
Senator,
on
this
your show.
on this
She didn't
respect.
come on Breitbart Radio. It's The View.
It's astonishing to me that she can't answer a question on The View. But I want to ask you this. I have been criticized by a washed-up political consultant for saying sometimes she strikes me as she doesn't have a thought in her head. That was the case yesterday. She could not think of one thing. She didn't have a thought in her head. Is this Kamala Harris? Does she have a terrible Biden team is it her sister Maya who blew up her presidential campaign? How is she this bad at campaigning?
Well, Hugh, let me just stress again, she was gifted this nomination. And at every stage, really, the Democratic establishment has plowed a path to her rise. Willie Brown did it in San Francisco when she ran for DA. The Obama team did it in 2010 when she ran for Attorney General. If you recall, Barack Obama campaigned for her in the fall of 2010 for Attorney General. The race was so close. In California, it'd be like Donald Trump coming to Arkansas to campaign for an Attorney General. We'd love to have him, but it's a pretty red state. Probably not necessary. And then, of course, in 2015 and 2016, as you know, Hugh, the Democratic power structure in both Washington and California plowed her path to replace Barbara Boxer in the Senate. And they continued to for her first 2 years in the Senate to try to set her up to be the presidential nominee in 2020 until she totally bombed in 2019. She didn't even make it to the starting line in Iowa. So Hugh, I would just quote a line that you often like to quote in various contexts from Chariots of Fire. I can't put in what God left out.
You're right. It's one of my favorite quotes. I want to close by thanking you for your message when Emmanuel Clase gave up the 3-run dinger. I hope you'll be watching at 3 o'clock today when the Guardians beat the Tigers, Senator, in Detroit. Will you be doing that?
Well, it was a very tough loss for the Indians, but Clase doesn't give up many of those. I can't imagine he'll do it again. I think they need to beat the Tigers twice, though, because I would not want to face Tarek Skubal in a Game 5.
I do not want any more of him. Zero of him. Senator Cotton, always good to talk to you. Thank you, Senator. Be well. Follow him on X at Sen Tom Cotton, S-E-N, Tom Cotton. He knows his baseball, but I mean, sometimes people put the knife in at the worst times. Clase gives up a 3-run tater. He never does that, by the way, but they're playing at 3:08 in Detroit today. I'm on in Detroit right now. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan Law School, but I must say to all of my Michigan friends, the Guards are going to win. I want you to be ready for this. Let yourself down easy because it's been a nice run, but the Guards are going to explode today because they are mad. Steve Vogt has done a great job, and now they are angry. I don't think they're going to play another game in Cleveland until it's the Yankees or the Royals. I think the Royals are ahead in that series. Gosh, I hope it's the Yankees. I want to beat the Yankees. My grandson likes Aaron Judge, so I want to beat the Yankees just so I can tease him for the next year. Corey DeAngelis has been at the forefront of the parent reform effort. He is the parent, voice of parents in the school choice movement. He is senior fellow at the American Culture Project. He's the director of the Education Freedom Institute. He's my guest because on Monday he had in the New York Post a story about school choice and election 2024. Good morning, Corey. Summarize, if you will, your New York Post piece and why it matters, school choice, so much in this election.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. Look, school choice is a political winner. It's supported across party lines. A supermajority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents support school choice. But in particular, in the New York Post, I talked about how swing states could go towards Trump on the issue of school choice. You look at places like Pennsylvania, even their governor, who's a Democrat, Josh Shapiro, changed his education platform before his 2022 election to include support for private school choice. He even went on Fox News the following year in 2023 to reiterate that support. He ultimately caved to the teachers' unions, but he even read the tea leaves and saw that he at least needed to signal support to his constituents. Tens of thousands of families in Pennsylvania already use private school choice. And so, look, Kamala Harris has gone all in with the teachers' unions. She believes that your kids belong to the government, whereas Trump believes that families are the primary decision makers for their kids. This could be a huge winner for Trump in particular. The latest polling by America's most accurate pollster, Atlas Intel, found that Trump is actually up on the issue of education by 3 points, which, look, that's not a lot. I think it should be even bigger, but that's a seismic shift away from the Democrats' decades-long double-digit advantage on the issue of education. So this is bad news for Kamala Harris, the communist who thinks your kids belong to the government. It's good news for Trump, and he should lean into parental rights even more as a political winner, like we saw with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia back in 2021.
Corey DeAngelis, former President Trump, endorsed your book, The Parent Revolution. In the New York Post article, you educated me as to the school choice program in Milwaukee. I was unaware that it is among the largest and the oldest in the United States. How big is it? And do those parents vote in elections their decisions that are reflected in their choice of school choice initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. President Trump went to Milwaukee last week, a deep blue city, and I think it was a smart move because this is home to the nation's longest standing private school voucher program, where it started in 1990. Families can take their funding meant for educating their kids to the public school that works best for them. And if not, if that doesn't align with your values, if it's failing academically, you can take your money for your kids to a private school, a religious school, and the money follows the child. They have about 30,000 kids in Milwaukee alone using that program. Statewide, you have tens of thousands of more families using private school choice. And this is a political winner because these families in these blue areas that benefit from school choice can turn into single issue voters. We saw this happen in Florida, for example, in 2018, after DeSantis barely won his initial gubernatorial election. The headline in the Wall Street Journal the next day was that, quote, school choice moms tipped the governor's race in Florida. And this was because CNN exit polling, of all places, found that DeSantis actually overperformed with Black mothers after his opponent, Andrew Gillum, the Democrat, came out against the private school choice program, benefiting over 100,000 kids at the time, disproportionately low-income kids, non-white kids. These families who might have disagreed with DeSantis on everything else saw that school choice was so important that getting their child into a better education to provide them with a better opportunity and a better future was so important to them. They didn't want to lose their scholarships. We see the same dynamic playing out in the swing states. Arizona had just surpassed 80,000 families using private school choice. So many families wanted school choice in Arizona in 2022. When they opened up the applications, guess what happened, Hugh? The government website crashed. The demand is there. Families understand what they want, and Donald Trump understands their needs as well, and he's not caving to the special interests who control the Democrat Party called the teachers unions.
Last question, Corey. The movement has gone from Florida to Iowa to Ohio to Arizona. You've mentioned that there are other states with various variety of school choice programs. Where is the battleground next for school choice going statewide?
My home state of Texas. We now have the votes for universal school choice for the first time in Texas history in our House. There were 21 Republicans who voted against school choice, their own party platform issue last year. And guess what? Now, after the primaries, 14 of them are gone. It was a political earthquake. Primary voters held them accountable at the ballot box. And now we picked up those 14 votes even before the general election. We're going to get school choice across the finish line in Texas next year. Other red states will be the next ones to fall, the dominoes of the monopolies to fall, and then purplish states as well. Hopefully some blue states come along. It's a much heavier lift because their politicians are controlled by the teachers unions. But at some point, Democrats will have to defect too.
I'm kind of hoping it's in the reconciliation bill. We'll continue talking with Corey DeAngelis about school choice. He calls himself the school choice evangelist, and he is. Probably the most important advocate for change in the schools of the last decade. Thank you, Corey DeAngelis. Keep coming back. And America, you keep coming back. I'll be here tomorrow. Meanwhile, all the interviews are at my YouTube channel, and the podcast will be up later today. Everyone reviewing Kamala Harris on The View.